I still remember the exact moment I realized Josh was the kind of guy who could make something awkward feel, well, not awkward. We were at his tiny apartment, the kind of place that looked like a thrift store had exploded. Mismatched furniture, a stack of old vinyl records leaning against the wall, and a kitchen counter cluttered with empty coffee mugs and half-eaten snacks. It was the third time I'd been over, and honestly, I was still figuring out if this whole hanging out thing was going to lead anywhere, or if we'd just stay in the weird limbo of casual drinks and half smiles. So there we were, sitting on his beaten-up couch, a little too close, watching some random cooking show that neither of us cared much about. Josh's fingers were nervously tapping on his knee, which was odd because he was usually the chill, confident type, like the kind of guy who'd smile knowing exactly what he was doing, not one who'd tap his knee like he was trying to hatch an escape plan. Then he did something that completely caught me off guard. He smirked and said, "Want to see a trick I learned from my ex?" Now, I'm not gonna lie, that sentence made my heart do a weird little flip. Because first, there was the word ex, which is always a loaded one in the early stages of anything. And second, the promise of a trick. I wasn't sure if I should be curious, nervous, or just straight up suspicious. But curiosity won. I nodded, trying to play it cool, and before I knew it, Josh stood up, stretched like he was about to perform a magic act, and said, "Okay, so this is kinda dumb, but bear with me." He grabbed a deck of cards from the coffee table and shuffled them with a skill that looked like it belonged on some kind of street magician's stage. Then he looked at me, eyes sparkling with that familiar mischievous grin, and said, "Watch closely." What happened next was something I wasn't prepared for. Not because it was flashy or overly impressive. No, it was something almost ridiculously simple, but somehow, in that moment, kinda charming. He flipped one card, then another, and then, with the ease of someone who'd done this a dozen times before, he revealed a card that seemed impossible to have been anywhere but the top of the deck. I was already impressed, but then came the kicker. "Your turn. Let's see if you can do it." I blinked. "Wait, me? You want me to try that?" Josh nodded, leaning back with this look that said, "Come on, don't mess this up." And that, honestly, is where everything started to shift for me. Because what began as a goofy little card trick turned into this weird electric challenge between us that felt way more than just a game. It was the first time I really saw the side of Josh that wasn't just charming or funny, but someone who wanted to let me in, flaws, nerves, and all. I didn't know it then, but that little moment on his shabby couch was the start of something I wasn't ready for but couldn't stop wanting. And it all began with a card trick he learned from his ex. I took the deck from him, feeling the smoothness of the cards in my hands, but also this sudden weight of pressure I hadn't expected. I mean, it was just a card trick, right? But Josh's eyes were on me, and suddenly the room felt smaller, like we were in this bubble where all my usual cool guy front kind of melted away. "All right," I said, trying to sound casual. "Show me again?" He grinned and went through the moves one more time, slow and deliberate. He explained how to hold the deck, how to shuffle without messing up the order, and then how to subtly peek at the card on top so you could pull off the trick without anyone noticing. I gave it a shot, fumbling through the shuffle, almost dropping the cards a couple of times. Josh just laughed, his eyes warm and encouraging, not the least bit annoyed or impatient. "Hey, you're doing better than I did the first time I tried," he said. That made me laugh too, and just like that, the tension started to ease. I figured, why not? If the trick was a way to break the ice in a deeper way, then I was all in. After a few more attempts, I actually managed it. I looked up, expecting maybe a small clap or a "nice job." But Josh's smile grew wider, like I'd just passed some secret test. "See? Told you had it," he said, nudging me with his shoulder. And then, without any warning, he said, "Now, I want you to teach me a trick." I blinked. "Me? I don't know any tricks." Josh shrugged, eyes twinkling. "There's gotta be something. Maybe not a card trick, but something you do that surprises me." I thought about it for a second, then grinned. "Okay, challenge accepted." He pulled the deck back, plopped down on the couch, and crossed his arms, clearly ready for whatever weird talent I was about to reveal. I leaned in and whispered, "All right, I'm going to teach you how to make the world's best grilled cheese sandwich." He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but he played along, so I stood up and headed to the kitchen. It was a tiny space, but I liked it. Felt homey, real. The bread was a bit stale. The cheese was whatever was in the fridge. But I told him, "Watch and learn." I buttered the bread with exaggerated care, layered on the cheese, and made a big show of flipping the sandwich in the pan. Josh watched every move like I was some culinary wizard. When I finally handed him the golden brown, melty masterpiece, his grin was priceless. "That's just a sandwich," he said, biting into it. "Not just any sandwich," I said, crossing my arms. Grilled cheese is an art form. We ended up sitting on the floor, sharing the sandwich, laughing over how something so simple ended up being kind of special. It felt like one of those moments you don't realize are important until later. After that night, things between us shifted. It wasn't just about hanging out or casual dates anymore. It was more like we were starting to build something that felt real. Josh was open about small things, like how his last relationship had taught him to appreciate the little quirks in people, even the messy bits. I found myself wanting to know those quirks, the ones he didn't show right away. One night, a few weeks later, we were sprawled on his couch again, the city lights outside casting a soft glow through the window. I was in the middle of another failed attempt at that card trick, and Josh was watching me grin with this amused expression. "You know," he said quietly, "that trick was his thing, my ex. But it's funny, no matter how many times I do it, it never feels the same without someone to mess it up with." I looked at him, heart tight, in a way that surprised me. Guess I'm glad I'm the one messing it up now. He didn't say anything for a beat, just reached over and tangled our fingers together. "Yeah, me too." That was the moment I realized that sometimes the little things, the tricks, the sandwiches, the shared laughs, are what make everything else make sense. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that awkward card trick for anything. After that night, things between Josh and me felt like they were unfolding in slow motion, but in the best way possible. Like we'd accidentally found this secret rhythm. And every little moment between us was a new beat in a song neither of us had heard before but both wanted to dance to. One Saturday afternoon, a few days after the grilled cheese incident, Josh texted me out of the blue. Just a simple, "Wanna come over? I've got something to show you." The casualness of it made my stomach flip a little. Like, was this gonna be another one of his magic tricks? Or maybe something else? When I got to his place, he was waiting by the door with that half grin that made my knees go weak. "You're just in time," he said, pulling me inside. He led me to the living room where he'd cleared off this little corner of the floor, laying down a bunch of weird-looking puzzle pieces. "Okay, confession time," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "My ex and I used to do puzzles. Weird, right? But I kinda liked it. So I got this one for us." I raised an eyebrow but smiled. "So, you're saying this is like your version of a trick?" "Exactly," he said, eyes lighting up. "But with less sleight of hand, more patience." We sat down on the floor, the puzzle pieces spread out between us. At first, it felt a bit awkward. My fingers fumbling over pieces, trying to find edges, and Josh humming softly as he worked. But after a while, something clicked. Maybe it was the quiet togetherness, or the way our hands brushed when we reached for the same piece, but the puzzle became less about the picture we were making and more about the space we were sharing. Halfway through, Josh paused, looked at me and said, "You know, puzzles are like relationships. Bit frustrating. Some pieces don't fit right away, but with patience, it all comes together." I chuckled, feeling a little vulnerable, but also warmed. "That's pretty deep for a Saturday afternoon," he shrugged, smiling. "Hey, I'm full of surprises." By the time we finished, the sun had dipped low, casting a golden glow through the window. We leaned back, breathing a little heavier than from exertion, but in a good way. Josh stretched, then turned toward me with a softness that made my heart thud. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "Me too," I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, the puzzle wasn't the only thing that had fallen into place. The next few weeks blurred together in this sweet routine. Late-night talks that stretched until the city went quiet, coffee runs that turned into impromptu picnics in the park, and random text messages filled with inside jokes and emojis we both pretended didn't mean much but totally did. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself. He was making dinner. Some fancy pasta he swore was from a recipe his ex had shown him, but I suspected he just winged it. The kitchen was a mess of sauce-streaked counters and half-opened wine bottles, and Josh was humming off-key while stirring something in a pot. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him, heart squeezing in this unpredictable way. "So," I said, "how many exes have you taught card tricks to?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Just the one. And now, apparently, you." I tossed him a playful look. "Guess I'm special." He caught the look and grinned. "Yeah, you are." As we sat down to eat, the conversation drifted from silly to serious, in that way that feels natural when you're starting to really know someone. Josh told me more about his past relationship. The good, the bad, the lessons learned. I shared some of my own stories, the ones I usually kept tucked away, not because I wanted to hide, but because I wasn't sure if anyone wanted to hear. He listened without judgment, and when I finished a particularly raw confession, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for trusting me," he said softly. That simple gesture lit up something inside me, this mix of relief and hope and a little bit of fear, because feelings were creeping in faster than I expected. A few days later, we agreed to take a walk through the neighborhood park. It was chilly, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible, but we didn't care. Josh wrapped his scarf around my neck, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary, and I caught myself smiling like an idiot. We found a bench by the lake, sitting side by side watching ducks paddle lazily across the water. The sky was a deep shade of blue, and the streetlights were just flickering on. For a while, we just sat there, no need for words. Then Josh looked over at me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd meet someone who makes me want to learn new tricks." I met his gaze, feeling the weight of those words, and said, "I'm glad I'm the one." He smiled, that slow, genuine smile that reaches his eyes, and took my hand again. This time, I didn't pull away. Walking back to his place, our fingers tangled together, I realized that sometimes the best tricks aren't the ones you learn from someone else. They're the ones you discover together. That night, after we got back to Josh's apartment, we settled onto the couch with mugs of hot chocolate, him with marshmallows, me with just a splash of cream. It felt like one of those moments you want to hold on to forever, but also know you can't quite freeze in time. The kind where the silence between you isn't uncomfortable, but comfortable. Josh shifted closer, his shoulder brushing against mine, and I felt this flicker of nervous energy. It was strange how someone who had been a stranger just a few weeks ago could now feel like home. "So," Josh said, breaking the silence, "about that card trick, did you ever want to know why my ex taught it to me?" His voice had that teasing edge, but there was an undercurrent of something more thoughtful. I looked at him, curious. "No idea. Why?" He smirked. "Apparently, it was her way of saying, 'I trust you enough to teach you something silly but cool, like a secret handshake.'" I laughed. "That's kind of adorable." He shrugged and took a sip of his hot chocolate. "Yeah, well, she had her quirks. And I guess I never thought I'd want to learn tricks from anyone else." My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the way the room seemed to shrink around us. "So, does that mean I'm your new secret handshake?" Josh's grin softened. "Maybe." I wanted to say something that didn't sound dumb or too eager. So instead, I just reached over and tangled my fingers with his. It was a small gesture, but it felt huge. We sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, the kind of quiet that says more than words ever could. A couple of nights later, I found myself at Josh's place again, this time for what he called a movie marathon. I wasn't sure what to expect, some indie flicks maybe, but when I walked in, he transformed the living room into this cozy nest. Blankets, pillows, and a ridiculous amount of popcorn. He handed me a bowl and plopped down beside me, pulling me close without even asking. It was the kind of closeness that made me realize just how much I wanted him near. The first movie rolled, then the second, and by the third I was half dozing, my head resting on his shoulder. Somewhere between the plot twists and the bad jokes on screen, I felt Josh's hand slowly find mine. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The connection was enough. After the last movie ended, he looked down at me, eyes reflecting the soft glow of the TV. "I know I said the card trick was from my ex," he said, voice low. "But the truth is, what I really wanted was to share something with you, to see if we could make our own kind of trick." I smiled, feeling this warmth spread through my chest. "I think we're already making it." Before I could second guess myself, I leaned in and Josh met me halfway. Our first kiss was gentle, a little hesitant, but full of all the things neither of us could quite say out loud yet. It felt like the start of something new, something real. The days that followed were a mix of excitement and nervousness. We kept things casual on the surface: coffee dates, lazy Sundays, and silly competitions over who could nail the card trick faster. But underneath, there was this growing thread of something deeper, pulling us together. One afternoon, we found ourselves wandering through a local flea market. Josh picked up a vintage deck of cards, the edges worn and colors faded. He handed it to me with that same mischievous smile. "Maybe this one will bring us better luck." I laughed and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Or at least more fun. As we walked side by side, the sun warming our backs, I realized that the trick wasn't really in the cards or the puzzles or even the grilled cheese sandwiches. It was in the way we were learning to trust each other, to open up, and to find joy in the little things. The moments that made the awkwardness fade away and left something genuine in its place. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see what kind of tricks we'd come up with next. A few days after the flea market, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, replaying the last few weeks with Josh over and over in my head. It was strange how quickly someone could go from a casual acquaintance to the person whose smile made your chest tighten in the best way possible. I wasn't one to get swept up in things easily, but with Josh, it felt different. Like there was something real and messy and worth holding on to. That weekend, I decided to invite him over for dinner. I wanted to do something special, not just grilled cheese or takeout. I dug out an old cookbook my mom gave me years ago and picked a recipe that was ambitious for me: homemade gnocchi. I'd never tried it before, but figured if I screwed up, Josh would laugh it off like he always did. When he arrived, bags in hand, I was elbow deep in dough, trying to roll it out evenly without turning it into a sticky mess. Josh immediately jumped in, flouring the counter and making jokes about how he was the official taste tester. "Hey, if we're gonna mess this up, we might as well do it together," he said, grinning. That night turned into one of those perfect, chaotic evenings where the kitchen was covered in flour, the music was a little too loud, and we kept sneaking bites of dough when the other wasn't looking. At one point, Josh tried to teach me the proper way to shape the gnocchi, his hands guiding mine, and I caught myself getting lost in the way his touch felt. Warm, steady, familiar. We ended up eating the slightly misshapen gnocchi with a simple tomato sauce, laughing over how it probably didn't compare to a real Italian grandmother's version, but to me, it was perfect. Later, we settled on the couch, tired but happy. Josh stretched his legs out and looked at me, that funny half smile he always had when he was about to say something meaningful, but wasn't quite sure how. "You know," he said, "I was thinking about that trick I learned from my ex." "It's kind of funny how something so small can mean so much." I nodded, feeling that familiar tug in my chest. He continued, "I don't want us to be like that, caught up in the past or comparing what we have to what was. I want to make our own whatever this is." The honesty in his voice made me want to reach out and pull him closer. "I don't think I've ever felt this way before," I admitted quietly, "but I want to see where this goes." "With you." Josh's eyes softened, and he moved closer, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "Me too." After that night, things felt like they were moving faster, but also slowing down in the best way possible. We made plans for weekend hikes, lazy mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, and even started talking about meeting each other's friends. One evening, I met Josh at a small bar near his place. The kind of spot where the music was just loud enough to keep things interesting, but not so loud you couldn't talk. He was waiting by the door, looking a little more nervous than usual, which I found both adorable and unexpected. "I have something to show you," he said as he pulled me inside. He led me upstairs to a tiny rooftop deck overlooking the city skyline. Fairy lights were strung around the railing, casting a soft glow. A blanket was spread out on the floor, and there was a small cooler with drinks. I wanted to do something a little different, Josh said, rubbing the back of his neck. We settled down, the city humming quietly below us. I could feel the warmth of the blanket in Josh's body close to mine. For a moment, everything else, the noise, the worries, the past, just slipped away. I've been thinking, he started, about what you said, about us not comparing to what came before. I want us to build something new, something that's ours. I smiled, heart racing. I want that too. As we sat there watching the city lights flicker, Josh reached into his pocket and pulled out that worn deck of cards from the flea market. He shuffled them expertly and looked up at me with a wink. Ready for another trick? I laughed, nodding. Always. He showed me a few moves, then handed the deck over. This time, when I tried the trick, I didn't mess up as much. Josh clapped like an enthusiastic kid, and I couldn't help but feel like maybe, just maybe, we were making magic together. Later, when I was walking home, I kept thinking about that night, about how something as simple as a card trick could be the start of something much bigger. With Josh, the future felt less scary and more like an adventure I actually wanted to be on. And honestly, I'm excited to see where it takes us next. It wasn't long after that rooftop night that Josh and I started to talk about meeting each other's families. Not in some rushed or dramatic way, but because it felt right. Like this was no longer just two guys messing around with card tricks and grilled cheese. It was something real, something worth sharing. I'll admit, I was a little nervous about meeting his folks. His family was close-knit, the kind of people who made you feel like you'd been part of the crew forever, or maybe they just wanted to see if you could hold your own in a game of Scrabble. Either way, I wanted to make a good impression. Josh warned me ahead of time. Heads up, my mom is a master chef. I'm talking Michelin star level in her own kitchen. Don't be surprised if she puts you to work. When I arrived at their house, the smell of something savory and delicious hit me immediately. Josh's mom was warm and welcoming, with a laugh that filled the room and eyes that seemed to be constantly smiling. His dad was quieter but had this easygoing presence that made me feel at ease. Over dinner, Josh's mom kept asking me questions about my work, my hobbies, and of course, about Josh. It was less an interrogation and more like a way of saying, hey, I want to know the guy my son's hanging out with. At one point, Josh winked at me across the table and whispered, "You're doing great." After dinner, Josh suggested we all play a board game. I'm not much of a gamer, but I went along with it, and by the end, I was laughing so hard I barely cared if I was losing. When we finally left, Josh let out a breath he'd been holding all evening. So, how'd I do? I smiled, squeezing his hand. You did great. And your family? They're awesome. He grinned, looking relieved. Good. 'Cause next week, you're meeting mine. I blinked. Wait, you have another family? He laughed. Just the one, but I meant my brother. He's a character. Meeting Josh's brother was an experience. A tall, loud guy with a grin that seemed permanently glued to his face. He teased Josh mercilessly, but in a way that made it clear they were close. His jokes at my expense were good-natured, and by the end of the night, I felt like I'd earned a sort of unofficial membership in their circle. What struck me most was how Josh navigated it all. Comfortable, confident, but also deeply connected to the people around him. It made me want to be part of that world. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Josh invited me to his favorite coffee shop, a quirky little spot tucked away in a side street. They had these ridiculously good cinnamon rolls and the kind of espresso that could wake the dead. We sat by the window, watching people rush by, sky gray and misting rain outside. Josh reached across the table, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. I've been thinking. I raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous, he laughed. I mean it. About us. About how fast this is all moving. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I felt that too. He looked me in the eyes. I don't want to rush, but I also don't want to hold back. I like where this is going. My heart was pounding. Me too. It feels right. We sat quietly for a moment, the kind of silence that's full of everything you want to say, but don't need to. Then Josh smirked. "So, what's the next trick you want to teach me?" I grinned back. I was thinking something a little less card-related. "Oh yeah? Like what?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Like how to kiss without messing it up." Josh's eyes sparkled. Challenge accepted. That night, back at his apartment, we took our time. No pressure, just two guys learning the quirks and rhythms of each other. The awkward moments turned into laughter, and the laughter into something softer. Every touch, every glance, every shared smile felt like a new trick, a new secret we were creating together. Days turned into weeks. We built routines, inside jokes, and memories. Josh showed me his favorite hiking trail, and I introduced him to my vinyl collection. We cooked meals that sometimes tasted amazing and sometimes were disasters worth laughing over. One evening, as we sat on his couch watching the rain tap against the window, Josh turned to me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd find someone who makes me want to unlearn old tricks and try new ones." I smiled, heart full. Guess we're both lucky. He pulled me closer, and as our lips met, it felt like the best kind of magic. The kind that doesn't need any sleight of hand, just two people willing to take a chance. And honestly, I can't wait to see what kind of tricks we come up with next. Months had passed since that night on the rooftop, since the grilled cheese, the puzzles, and all the little moments we'd somehow stitched together into something real. Josh and I had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, a comfortable kind of magic built on trust, laughter, and the occasional failed card trick. One quiet Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves back on that same worn couch in his apartment, the city humming softly outside the window. The light was fading, casting a warm glow over the cluttered living room. Books stacked everywhere, mugs half full, and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Josh was shuffling his deck of cards with that same mischievous grin, the one that had pulled me in from the start. But this time, the tension wasn't about who could pull off the trick better. It was softer, slower, like the space between us was filled with something deeper. He looked up, eyes catching the light, and said quietly, "You know, I never really believed in magic until this." I smiled, heart tightening. "Me neither." He paused, then reached out, fingers brushing against mine. "I'm glad you stuck around to mess up my trick." "So am I," I whispered. We sat there for a moment, hands intertwined, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about two people who'd found something rare in each other. A connection that didn't need to be perfect to be enough. Later, as the evening settled in, Josh pulled me close. "I don't have any more tricks from exes to show you," he said with a soft laugh. "But I'm ready to make new ones, with you." I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear. "I think we've already started." And in that quiet, ordinary moment, I realized that the best kinds of magic aren't the ones you learn from someone else. They're the ones you create together, piece by piece, laugh by laugh, trick by trick. With Josh, I didn't just learn a new trick. I learned how to trust, how to hope, and how to fall in a way that felt real. And that was more than enough.